Officer Ryler acted like he owned Oakhaven, strong-arming the old folks and taking what he pleased, but he just made a fatal miscalculation. His cruel provocation was pouring scalding coffee on a sleeping German shepherd, unaware that the dog's silent owner was a battle-hardened Navy SEAL. And that man was about to dismantle a corrupt police department from the inside out without ever firing a gun. Before this story unfolds, let us know where it's reaching you. And if this story of loyalty resonates with you, please subscribe for more. The oppressive, suffocating humidity of Savannah hung like a shroud over the city, clinging to age-old cobblestones and the weeping Spanish moss that fell from the live oaks. Like the beards of ancient storytellers, it was a dense, wet heat that held the promise of a ferocious storm before the day was through. But for now, the city was slowly stirring to life, bathed in a haze of golden light as steam ghosted up from the damp pavement. But inside the Oakhaven diner, the air offered a cool mercy, conditioned by a rattling window unit that hummed in a steady harmony. With the sound of bacon sizzling on the greased flat top, Jasper Miller occupied the farthest corner booth, his back pressed hard against the cool, slick vinyl. It was a tactical position, allowing him a clear view of the entire room without turning his head. He was a man forged from dense, corded muscle and silent watchfulness. A faint, jagged scar etched along his jawline spoke of a life lived a world away from the peace of this quiet breakfast corner. Beneath the table, a silent guardian rested Ranger, his magnificent German shepherd, whose black and tan coat gleamed with vibrant health and meticulous care. Ranger lay utterly still, his chin resting with a gentle weight on Jasper's boot, offering a silent, steady pressure that anchored Jasper to the here and now, amidst the comforting aroma of roasted coffee beans, burnt toast, and lemon-scented floor cleaner, a nostalgic blend that smelled like a home he hadn't known in years. For a long, peaceful stretch, the brass bell over the door was still letting the soft murmur of morning regulars fill the air with a comforting hum. Mabel, the waitress who'd been working these floors since the mid-70s, shuffled toward them, a steaming coffee pot in one hand and a pitcher of ice water in the other. She offered a radiant smile, her face creasing into a roadmap of kindness. "Morning, Jasper," she said, her voice a warm, raspy welcome, like the rustle of dry autumn leaves. "Brought some extra ice water for the handsome gentleman down there. It's going to be a real scorcher today. Can't have him going thirsty on us." Jasper glanced up, offering a rare, genuine smile that seemed to melt the hardened edges of his expression and the vigilance in his eyes. "Thanks, Mabel," he answered, his voice a deep baritone that rumbled from within his chest. "He'll appreciate that, and honestly, so will I." Mabel then poured the cool water into the collapsible bowl Jasper had already placed on the floor. "You two need anything else? More toast? How about a sausage for Ranger?" she asked with a playful wink. "We're all set for now, Mabel. The coffee's perfect," Jasper replied with quiet respect. She nodded, giving his shoulder a motherly pat. "All right, sugar. You just holler if you change your mind." As she shuffled off to tend to her other tables, Jasper watched her, a sharp pang of gratitude rising in him for the simple, unpretentious kindness that filled this diner. He raised his heavy ceramic mug, blowing a wisp of steam from its surface before taking a slow, deliberate sip. And for a fleeting moment, everything felt right, balanced, and safe. Then the front door was thrown open with violent force. The brass bell shattered the peace, jangling violently against the glass. The warm, cozy atmosphere of the diner instantly curdled as three uniformed officers strode in, bringing with them a wave of suffocating, humid air and an aura of pure arrogance that seemed to steal the very breath from the room. At the helm was Officer Hank Ryler, a man whose reputation for intimidation was as immense as the waistline straining against his uniform. His neck was thick, his face perpetually flushed, and his small, cruel eyes swept the room, hunting for a target, not a crime. "Smells like old grease and hopelessness in here, boys," Ryler boomed, his voice shattering the diner's fragile peace like a stone through glass. His two subordinates chuckled nervously, mimicking his disdain like well-trained parrots, while the regulars kept their eyes glued to their plates. They stared down at their eggs and grits, praying to escape the bulldog's notice, as Ryler's gaze swept past the counter. He ignored the menu, his eyes locking onto the corner booth. He saw Jasper, and then the black tip of Ranger's tail just barely visible. A cruel, bored glint ignited in his eyes. He nudged one of the other officers, a smirk twisting his lips as he jerked his head toward Jasper. Ryler started down the narrow aisle, his heavy boots thudding against the linoleum with a foreboding rhythm. He wasn't walking to a table. He was on a collision course. As he closed in on Jasper's booth, he made no effort to slow his pace or step aside. In his hand, he clutched a large takeout cup of steaming coffee, its lid deliberately loosened. Just as he passed, Ryler feigned a stumble, tilting the cup with cold, calculated precision. The dark, scalding liquid cascaded downwards, splashing onto the floor mere inches from Ranger's paws. The heat was immediate, and Ranger flinched. He pulled his paws back with a sharp, audible gasp, yet the dog remained silent, his ironclad training suppressing the instinct to yelp or lash out. A dead, heavy silence descended upon the diner. Ryler stopped, his gaze dropping to the floor. A mock expression of surprise was plastered across his flushed, sweaty face. "Oops," Ryler said. He let out a dry, humorless chuckle that grated like gravel. "My bad. Didn't see the mutt there." He locked eyes with Jasper, a clear challenge in his gaze, daring him to react. "You really shouldn't have a dangerous animal." "In a place where decent folks are trying to eat," Ryler sneered, stepping closer. "It's a tripping hazard. Next time I might not be so clumsy." Jasper remained perfectly still, his hand resting gently on Ranger's neck, feeling the powerful muscles vibrating with tightly coiled tension. Jasper's pulse never jumped, his breathing never hitched. He just stared up at Ryler, his eyes flat, cold, and utterly devoid of fear or rage. They held only pure, lethal calculation. "He's under the table," Jasper stated, his voice level and dangerously calm. His words cut through the tension like a blade. "He's not in your way." Ryler's smirk faltered, unnerved by the absolute absence of fear in the stranger's eyes. "Watch your tone, pal," Ryler spat, puffing out his chest to loom larger. "I'm the law in this town. You and your dog are just passing through. Remember that." Ryler paused, waiting for a retort, a shout, anything he could twist into an excuse for violence. But Jasper offered him only a profound, unsettling silence. Uncomfortable with the stillness, Ryler grunted, "Clean that mess up," before turning and strutting to the counter, leaving the puddle of coffee to steam on the floor. Jasper didn't even glance at the mess. His eyes remained fixed on Ryler's back, burning the man's badge number into his memory. "Stay," he whispered softly to Ranger, rubbing the dog's velvety ears. "We're okay, buddy. We're okay." The puddle of dark roast coffee on the linoleum floor began to slowly disappear. Under the absorbent white napkins, Jasper had quietly requested the brown liquid soaked into the paper, like ink into a blotter. Jasper Miller moved with the efficient, economical grace of a man who had spent a lifetime cleaning up far more dangerous messes than spilled caffeine. He wiped the floor dry, his face an unreadable mask. While Ranger remained at his side, the dog's amber gaze locked a silent, unwavering vigil upon the three uniformed officers holding court in the center booth. A fragile quiet had settled over the diner, but the air was still heavy charged with unspoken tension, like the dead calm before a storm. The familiar, cheerful clink of forks on ceramic had dissolved into a tense, hushed quiet and anxious whispers. Jasper slid back into the booth, his hand finding Ranger's head in a steadying gesture. He wasn't leaving. A civilian would have settled the tab and fled, driven until this town was just a bad memory in the rear view. But Jasper's spirit was not that of a civilian. He was a hunter, his prey now sighted, and he had to map the terrain before making his move. He raised his mug, the coffee inside now cool and forgotten, watching over the rim as Officer Hank Ryler and his two cronies ate with a ravenous, sloppy entitlement that turned his stomach. They tore through mountains of pancakes and greasy bacon, their laughter booming through mouthfuls, treating the diner less like a business and more like their personal mess hall, a place where civility was a foreign concept. In the booth just beside Jasper's, a new presence leaned in, closing the space between their tables with a quiet, conspiratorial shift of his weight. This was Arthur, a man who seemed as ancient and frail as the Spanish moss dripping from the oaks outside. He was bone-thin, almost skeletal, in a faded plaid shirt buttoned to the neck and a cap that marked him as a veteran of the Second World War. His hands trembled with a steady, rhythmic tremor, but his eyes, though filmed with age and cataracts, held a piercing intelligence that defied his fragile frame. Arthur made a show of stirring his tea, but his words were a low, gravelly whisper, meant only for Jasper. "You've got some serious restraint, son." Arthur murmured, his gaze fixed on his cup to avoid drawing any eyes. "Most men would have thrown a fist by now. I saw your hand twitch. You've seen a thing or two, haven't you?" Jasper angled his head just enough, a silent nod of acknowledgement to the old soldier. "Enough to know which battles to choose?" Jasper replied, his voice low. "Who is he, the loud one?" Arthur's sigh was like the slow leak from a tired old tire. "That's Hank Ryler. We call him the Bulldog, though that's a damn insult to dogs everywhere," Arthur said, his eyes softening as he glanced at Ranger. "He runs this town like it's his own private kingdom. He pushes, he takes, and he breaks anyone or anything he wants." Jasper watched Ryler drag the back of his hand across his mouth, leaving a greasy smear on his cheek. "Why hasn't anyone stopped him?" Jasper asked, his eyes narrowing as he dissected the group's dynamics. The other two were pure followers, laughing a little too loud at Ryler's jokes, their postures screaming submission and a pathetic need for approval. Arthur let out a dry, rasping chuckle that held no humor. "Because the apple doesn't fall far from the poisoned tree," Arthur explained, his trembling hand gripping the teacup to steady it. "Hank's father is Big Jim Ryler, the mayor. Been mayor for 20 years. Police chief is Hank's uncle. The judge, his godfather. You see the picture? You go against the Bulldog, you're going against the entire corrupt foundation of Oakhaven. Folks here, they just keep their heads down and pray." He moves on to someone else. The truth settled into Jasper's mind, clicking into place with the cold finality of a magazine locking into a rifle. This wasn't just one bad cop. It was a small-town dictatorship. And that explained it all: the shameless arrogance, the complete absence of fear, the absolute certainty Ryler carried himself with, that there would never be consequences for his actions. The spectacle at the center table was winding down. Ryler let out a belch that echoed through the quiet diner, a sound that made people flinch. He shoved his plate aside and stood hiking his belt over his gut as his two lackeys scrambled to their feet. They made no move for their wallets. No check ever touched the table. Ryler just gave a dismissive nod toward the empty plates and moved toward the exit, a suffocating unspoken agreement hanging in the air. This was the cost of protection. The price for existing in a town clenched in the Ryler family's fist. They had their fill. They departed, and the diner swallowed the loss. Jasper observed this blatant theft, a cold fury simmering just beneath the surface. It was never about the money. It was the principle of it all. The raw abuse of power against good people who had no means to defend themselves. As Ryler neared the front counter, Mabel was there tallying a bill for a paying customer. A deep exhaustion etched her face. Her smile strained as she fought to ignore the menacing shadow cast by the three men. And then it happened. A small, inconsequential slip that shifted the entire weight of the room. As Mabel turned for a mint, her elbow brushed against a basket of silverware on the counter. A lone metal fork spun over the edge, striking the floor with a piercing, ringing clang. It was a moment that meant nothing. A simple, fleeting clumsiness of age. But Ryler froze. He turned his head a slow, deliberate motion and stared down at the fork, as if it were a body on the floor. The diner fell into a dead silence once more. Ryler closed the distance to the counter, invading Mabel's personal space. He loomed over the small, elderly woman. He didn't offer to help her. Instead, he leaned in his face a breath away, his face mere inches from hers. "You're getting sloppy, Mabel." Ryler whispered, his voice a menacing, silky threat, a tone far more terrifying than any shout. "Dropping filthy utensils on the floor of a food establishment." Mabel's hands trembled as she reached for a clean cloth. "I'm so sorry, Hank, it just slipped. I'll wash it right away." She stammered, her voice a thin thread of fear. Ryler planted a heavy hand on the counter, drumming his thick fingers. "Sanitation is a serious business," he said, savoring the control he held over her. "I could call the health inspector this instant, have him shut this diner down for a complete review. How would you pay your rent then, Mabel? How would you afford your medicine?" A surge of white-hot anger flared in Jasper's chest, a physical rage that threatened to boil over. He watched Mabel shrink back, her eyes wide and wet with tears, terrified not just of the man, but of the utter ruin he represented. Here was a woman who had worked her entire life, and this petty tyrant was threatening her world over a single dropped fork. Ryler chuckled, satisfied with the terror he'd inspired. "Be careful, old woman," he sneered. "Next time I might not be so understanding." He turned and strode out, the door's bell jingling with a sickening cheer, completely unaware of the darkness he'd left behind. Jasper sat frozen, his hand gripping the table's edge so tightly his knuckles shone white. He wasn't leaving. Not yet. The mission had just begun, and the target had just painted a bullseye squarely on his own back. The choice to remain in Oak Haven wasn't marked by a grand declaration, but by the silent, terrifying certainty of a hunter finding his prey. Jasper Miller walked out of the Oak Haven diner, the brass bell chiming one final time behind him, and stepped into the suffocating midday sun, a heat that felt like a furnace. He didn't turn back toward the highway. Instead, he steered his matte black pickup, a truck chosen for its quiet reliability and utter lack of memorable features, toward a remote campground hidden on the town's edge. The shift from a man on vacation to a man on a mission was immediate total. For the next 48 hours, Jasper ceased to be a simple traveler. He became what the Navy had spent millions of dollars, training him to become a ghost. He established a temporary base deep within a dense grove of pine trees, where shadows clung to the ground and the air was thick with the scent of resin. This was never about a spilled cup of coffee. This was never just about one man. It was about confirming a chilling hypothesis: men like Hank Ryler were rarely isolated. They were symptoms of a much deeper rot. And Jasper had to know just how deep the infection ran before he could ever perform surgery, before the true watch could even begin. It started with their ritual under the hushed canopy of the whispering pines, as the sun began to bleed below the horizon, bruising the sky in shades of purple and orange. Jasper attended to Ranger, and this was never just maintenance. It was a conversation that needed no words. Jasper sat on the truck's tailgate, his movements slow and reverent as he brushed Ranger's thick coat, a rhythmic and steady whisper. The sound of the bristle brush against fur was a hypnotic pulse, one that seemed to lower the very heartbeat of both man and dog. Ranger leaned his heavy weight into Jasper's leg, his eyes half-lidded in blissful surrender, trusting his human completely. Jasper checked every inch of his partner, lifting each paw to inspect the pads for thorns or cuts, carefully cleaning his ears. He ran his hands over the powerful muscles, feeling for any tension. "You're good, buddy. You're strong," Jasper murmured. His voice was a low rumble that Ranger felt more than heard. This ritual was essential. It reinforced the bond that made them one single breathing unit. In the field, Ranger wasn't a tool, he was a partner, and his well-being was a higher priority than Jasper's own. Once the grooming was done, the mission began. Jasper reached into a secure lockbox in the truck bed and withdrew a tactical harness. It was a piece of formidable military-grade gear. It was lightweight, but incredibly durable, designed to carry loads, and more importantly, surveillance equipment. With practiced ease, Jasper attached a high-definition micro camera to the chest strap. It was no larger than a matchbox, matte black, and utterly invisible against Ranger's dark coat built to record in near total darkness and transmit a localized signal. "Work time," Jasper said softly, and the change in Ranger was instantaneous. The proud dog's posture went rigid. His ears perked his playful demeanor, vanishing, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. For 2 days they moved like ghosts through the shadows of Oak Haven. Jasper didn't engage. He watched. He learned the very rhythm of the town and the predictable, arrogant dance of Officer Ryler's patrol. He observed from inside parked cars from unseen rooftops and from deep in the alleyways, noting that Ryler's squad car spent more time lurking behind businesses than it ever did patrolling the streets. On the evening of the second day, their quiet intelligence gathering was about to reach its peak. Jasper had tracked Ryler's cruiser to a dimly lit industrial park at the town's edge, a desolate place of rusted corrugated fences and mountains of discarded tires. The humidity had finally broken into a light, miserable drizzle that slicked the asphalt and muffled every footstep. Jasper parked his truck a block away. Hidden behind a dumpster, he deployed Ranger. "Go watch," he commanded with a single hand signal that meant complete and total stealth. Ranger simply melted into the darkness, a shadow moving within shadows, his paws making no sound upon the wet, glistening pavement. Through the stark light of a tablet screen inside his truck, Jasper watched the grainy but clear live feed from the camera on Ranger's chest. Ranger expertly navigated the perimeter of a fenced-in lot, staying low in the tall weeds until the camera framed the unfolding scene perfectly. Ryler's cruiser idled next to a beaten-down sedan with out-of-state plates. A man was standing outside the sedan, his face a mask of raw terror. He was a tourist, a middle-aged father in a soaked windbreaker, his hands trembling as he held out his wallet in a gesture of surrender. This was the first target. Ryler was leaning out his window, his face illuminated into a cruel caricature by the harsh dashboard lights. "I'm telling you, the speed limit drops." Ryler's voice crackled through the audio feed, distorted but horribly clear. "Now we can go down to the station. They'll impound this vehicle and have a long chat with the judge on Monday. Or you can pay the on-the-spot fine for out-of-towners, $500 cash." The tourist, desperate to protect his family, huddled inside the car, didn't argue his shaking hands fumbling with the cash. Handing over a thick wad of cash, Ryler snatched it with a greedy grin and waved him on. "Drive safe now," he jeered with cold amusement. As the tourist's car sped away, fleeing the predator in a uniform, a cold knot of utter disgust tightened deep in Jasper's gut. But the night was far from over. 10 minutes later, a second vehicle rumbled into view, a rusted tow truck driven by a new player in this sordid play. The man who emerged was a wiry, thin figure, his skin the color of old parchment and grease so deeply etched into his fingerprints it was part of him. He wore a mechanic's jumpsuit that had survived better decades, moving with the jerky, nervous energy of a cornered rodent. This was Lenny, a local fence. Known for stripping cars clean before their owners could even report them missing, while Ranger, ever watchful, stayed concealed in the tall grass. He adjusted his position ever so slightly, following Jasper's quiet command through the earpiece, the camera panning silently to capture the entire exchange. Lenny approached the cruiser, but this time the dynamic was completely different. There was no fear in the air, only the cold calculus of business. "I got the parts from that Honda Civic you tipped me off about." Lenny rasped, his voice a wheezy, high-pitched whine. "All cleaned and crated, ready to ship." Ryler nodded, lighting a cigarette. The brief flare of the match illuminated the deep greed in his eyes. "Good. And my cut?" Ryler demanded. Lenny reached into his grimy jumpsuit, pulling out a thick envelope and passing it through the window. "Standard 20%, Hank. Plus a little extra for taking the heat off my back last week." Ryler weighed the envelope in his hand, a satisfied smirk on his face. "Keep it quiet, Lenny. I don't want the sheriff asking why the crime stats are down while your inventory is up." And just like that, the transaction was complete. Ryler had just accepted a bribe from the very criminal enterprise he was sworn to dismantle. It was a felony captured forever in high definition as Jasper watched the screen. His finger hovered over the save button, ensuring the file was encrypted and instantly backed up to a secure cloud server. He then whispered a single recall command into his headset. Return. Ranger turned, melting back into the darkness as silently as he had emerged, leaving the two criminals to their self-congratulatory smoke break. Jasper leaned back into the driver's seat of his truck, the tablet's glow illuminating his grim expression. In that moment, he was no longer just a witness. He was the holder of the smoking gun. The evidence was irrefutable, digital, and absolutely damning. The surveillance phase was officially over. Now it was time to decide how to detonate the bomb he had just meticulously built. Sunday mornings in Oak Haven always pulsed with a distinct, vibrant rhythm, a tempo noticeably louder, and more frantic than the sleepy lull of the weekdays. The sun was high and bright, its light filtering beautifully through the weeping willows, casting dappled shadows on the pavement as families fresh from church services flooded the streets, dressed in their Sunday best. Inside the Oak Haven diner, the air hung thick with the heavy, sweet scent of maple syrup frying sausage and the perfumed talcum powder of the elderly parishioners. Every booth was packed, the counter lined with men discussing the sermon and the upcoming football season. And into this bustling, chaotic slice of domesticity walked Jasper Miller. He wasn't wearing his tactical gear or the nondescript clothing of a ghost. Today he wore a clean, pressed button-down shirt that emphasized the sheer width of his shoulders. He looked every bit the respectful visitor, yet his eyes retained that sharp, predatory focus. At his heel, Ranger moved with the disciplined trot of a champion show dog, his noble fur brushed to a high sheen, wearing his service vest a clear signal to deter the unwanted petting from curious children who pointed and whispered in awe. Jasper didn't look for an empty corner this time. He no longer sought the comfort of the shadows. He walked straight into the very center of the room. His boots made a solid, rhythmic thud against the old floorboards, a sound that seemed to cut right through the chatter as he set his sights on the best table in the house. It was a sweeping, circular booth, perfectly placed by the bay window, offering a commanding view of Main Street and the sprawling parking lot. A table that radiated authority. The unspoken throne of the diner, yet it sat empty, a stark contrast to the long line of people waiting patiently by the entrance. But the locals knew the unspoken law. For years, this table was the hallowed ground of Officer Hank Ryler and his crew during the Sunday morning rush. It was a throne built for the town's tyrant, kept vacant by a silent, shared fear. Jasper broke the silence, the legs of the chair screaming against the floor as he pulled it out. He sat gesturing for Ranger to take his post beneath the table. The loyal dog obeyed instantly, his body facing the door, a silent guardian. The shift in the room was subtle, yet absolute. Like a stone dropped in a still pond, a hush spread in widening circles from his table as conversations sputtered and died. Eyes darted toward him. Then, just as quickly, they looked away, as if to hold his gaze for too long was an act of conspiracy. And so the hushed, nervous whispers began to fill the void. It was a sound woven from anxiety and a strange, hidden excitement. They all knew the rules, and they were witnessing a man who either didn't or, more thrillingly, simply didn't care. Mabel hurried over her usual sunny disposition, eclipsed by a nervous, fluttering energy that betrayed her fear. With a trembling hand, she wiped at the already spotless tabletop, her eyes darting anxiously toward the front entrance. "Jasper, honey," she whispered, leaning in so close her words were a breath against his ear. "You can't sit here. This is..." "Well, you know whose table this is. They're here every single Sunday right about now." Her gaze was filled with genuine heartfelt concern. Her brow was a knot of worry. Jasper offered a placid smile, a calm mask that couldn't conceal the unwavering watchfulness in his eyes. "It's a fine view, Mabel, and it was empty," he stated simply. "I'll have the steak and eggs, medium rare, and a bowl of water for Ranger." Mabel hesitated, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron, but she saw the unshakable resolve etched on his face. She gave a single solemn nod, a quiet resignation falling over her. Moments later she returned not only with water, but with a small plate of warm, buttery biscuits he hadn't asked for. "On the house," she whispered, her voice a ghost of a sound. "You might need your strength." It was a small act of defiance, a quiet offering of support. Jasper nodded his gratitude, breaking a biscuit and slipping a piece to Ranger. The wait was not long. At 10 o'clock on the dot, the heavy oak door groaned open, and the diner's atmosphere instantly curdled from nervous tension into a thick, suffocating dread. Officer Hank Ryler strode in, flanked by his two usual deputies, their laughter a harsh, boisterous sound as they began unbuckling their duty belts, already making room for the feast they felt entitled to. Ryler carried himself like a man who owned everything he saw his uniform straining to contain his imposing frame. His face was flushed with the heat and an unshakable arrogance as he scanned the room, offering a dismissive wave to a few locals who returned it with subservient nods. Then his eyes fell upon the window booth. The laughter caught in his throat. He stopped dead in his tracks, his deputies nearly colliding with his back. Ryler blinked as if his mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Someone was in his seat. Not just anyone. It was the drifter with the dog, the very man he had tried to break just days before. The blood surged into Ryler's face, staining it a deep, ugly crimson. The silence in the diner was now total. Even the sizzle of the griddle had gone quiet. Ryler marched across the diner, his hand settling on the baton at his hip, not drawing it, but reminding everyone it was there. The heavy thud of his boots echoed as the only sound in the dead, still room. He reached the table and loomed over Jasper, his shadow eclipsing the morning sun. Jasper never looked up. He was focused on his meal, cutting a piece of steak with surgical precision, the knife gliding silently against the plate. With a flick of his wrist, Ryler freed his baton, tapping it on the table. Clack, 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 a sharp, unnerving rhythm designed to intimidate. "You're in my seat, boy." Ryler's voice was a low growl, thick with the weight of his authority. "I think you need to move along now." The command hung in the air, a poisonous vapor. The entire diner watched, a collective breath held in anticipation of the inevitable clash. Jasper calmly finished slicing a piece of steak, then set his knife and fork down with deliberate, almost surgical precision on his plate. He lifted his head, his expression not of fear but of weary disappointment, as his eyes flicked from the baton to the inferno raging in Ryler's. "I happened to check the reservation book on my way in." Jasper's voice cut through the tension, clear and steady for every soul in the room to hear. "There's no name on this table, officer. And unless you have a warrant for this steak, I fully intend on finishing my meal." The silence that fell over the Oakhaven diner was a fragile thing, a thin sheet of ice threatening to crack under the immense pressure. Officer Hank Ryler stood paralyzed, his face a mottled canvas of disbelief, twisting into a storm of pure, unadulterated rage. He'd been defied in his own kingdom, in front of his own people by a stranger who lacked the common sense to even look afraid. The old air conditioner rattled on overhead. It did nothing to cool the sudden, violent temperature in the room. Words had failed Ryler, so he turned to the one language he truly spoke fluently: brute force. He took a half step back, jerking his chin toward Jasper, a silent, vicious order to his two subordinates hovering eagerly just behind him. Like vultures scenting a final breath, the two officers moved with the synchronized menace of lifelong schoolyard bullies. To Ryler's left was Officer Sneed, a man built of sharp angles and nervous energy, his ferret-like eyes constantly darting around, always searching for an escape route or an advantage. He was a small, cruel man who savored the power a badge gave him. It shielded him from the fallout of his own vicious nature. On the right stood Officer Vance, a towering wall of slow, methodical muscle. His shaven head and vacant stare said it all. He followed orders because independent thought was simply too much of an effort. Sneed made the first move, but his target wasn't the man, it was the animal. He knew the quickest way to shatter a man was to harm what he loves. A vile smirk twisted Sneed's thin lips as he lunged, swinging his heavy boot in a vicious arc directly at Ranger's side beneath the table. The police-issue boot connected with a sickening thud. A deep guttural growl tore from Ranger's chest, a tremor that seemed to shake the very floorboards. It was a sound so primal, so loaded with ancient danger, that diners in the nearest booth physically recoiled as the dog's lips peeled back from his teeth. Revealing fangs built to crush bone, every muscle in his body coiled to spring. Sneed flinched, stumbling back as his bravado evaporated. His hand fumbled for his sidearm, but before Ranger could unleash his fury, Jasper's voice sliced cleanly through the chaos. Not loud, but forged from steel, commanding absolute obedience. "Easy," Jasper set his tone flat, hard, and unwavering. "Down. Stay." It was a profound testament to thousands of hours of elite training that Ranger froze in an instant. The dog did not relax. His amber eyes remained locked on Sneed's throat with lethal intent, but he did not advance. He held his position, a perfect statue of controlled fury, trusting his handler to neutralize the threat. The sheer cruelty of the attack on the loyal dog, and a palpable shockwave of disgust through the diner. In the next booth, Arthur, the frail World War II veteran, could no longer remain seated. A sense of justice forged in the fires of a righteous war against tyranny overrode his body's frailty. He pushed himself to his feet, on trembling legs and knuckles bone white, as he gripped the table's edge. "That is enough," Arthur's voice boomed. His voice, frail with age, yet burning with indignation, cut through the diner. "You do not kick a dog. What in God's name is wrong with you people?" He reached a trembling hand toward Sneed's shoulder, a desperate, fragile attempt to stop the cruelty, but it was Officer Vance the giant who moved. He didn't even spare the old man a glance. He simply extended a massive arm and shoved Arthur backward with the casual, cruel indifference of swatting a fly. Arthur flew backward, his body hitting the vinyl seat of his booth with a heavy, jarring thud that violently knocked the wind out of him. A collective gasp of horror rippled through the onlookers as Mabel screamed, dropping a tray of silverware that clattered across the floor, a sound that became the final straw. Jasper stopped cutting his steak. He placed his knife down on the plate, the motion impossibly slow, his calm veneer still perfectly in place. But the temperature behind his eyes had plunged to absolute zero. Ryler saw the shift and pure panic seized him as he snatched the Taser X-26 from his belt. The yellow plastic weapon looked like a child's toy in his meaty fist. "You are under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting," Ryler yelled, his voice shrill with fear. He gave no time for compliance. He aimed for Jasper's chest and pulled the trigger, the sharp pop of the compressed nitrogen cartridge echoing in the tense quiet. But Jasper was already a phantom in motion, his reflexes forged in the brutal crucible of close-quarters combat. Jasper didn't just dodge, he flowed. He twisted his upper body to the left, and the two barbed probes whizzed past to embed themselves harmlessly in the booth's worn upholstery. In the same fluid motion, Jasper surged upward. He didn't just strike Ryler, he began to dismantle him. Jasper's left hand clamped onto Ryler's wrist like a vice. Controlling the weapon, his right forearm drove into the elbow joint as he pivoted, using Ryler's own momentum and considerable body weight against him. There was a stunning blur of motion, a sharp cry of agony from Ryler, and then a deafening final thud. The officer was slammed face first onto the diner floor, pinned in a wrist lock so precise it threatened to snap the bone if Ryler moved a single inch. The taser skittered uselessly across the floor as the diner fell into a stunned, ringing silence. The town's tyrant was on his knees. His face was pressed against the dirty linoleum, completely helpless before a man who had not even broken a sweat. But the victory was momentary. "Freeze! Drop him now!" Sneed screamed, his voice cracking and breaking with raw terror. Both Sneed and Vance had drawn their service pistols. The black barrels of two Glock 17s were now pointed directly at Jasper's head. The room was frozen on a knife's edge. This was the precipice. Jasper could feel the taut tension in Ryler's arm, could hear the shallow, panicked breathing of the two officers behind him. He knew he could snap Ryler's arm. He could probably disarm Sneed before he pulled the trigger, but he couldn't stop both of them without risking a stray bullet hitting Mabel or Arthur or Ranger. Jasper made the calculation in less than a heartbeat. The physical battle was won. Now he had to win the war. He slowly, deliberately released the pressure on Ryler's wrist. He opened his hands, showing his palms to the gunman, and then slowly rose to his feet. "I am complying," Jasper announced. His voice was steady and loud, ensuring every single witness in the room heard him. "I am unarmed. I am surrendering." He turned his back to the aimed guns and placed his hands behind his head, interlocking his fingers. Ryler scrambled to his feet, his face red with humiliation and spitting with fury. Cuff him now!" Ryler shrieked, rubbing his aching wrist. Vance holstered his weapon and rushed forward. He slammed Jasper hard against the diner window, wrenching his arms down to snap the cold handcuffs on. The metal ratchet clicked tight once, twice, 3 times. Jasper offered no resistance. He stood tall, looking out the window at the peaceful, sunny street beyond. His face was an impassive mask. He let them drag him out, let them savor their hollow victory. But as they marched him toward the door, leaving a growling Ranger to be subdued by animal control, Jasper knew the grim truth he had just masterfully baited them into assaulting a decorated veteran, falsely arresting him, and menacing civilians all captured on camera with half the town bearing witness. The trap wasn't just set, it had just snapped shut on their throats. The drive to the Oak Haven Police Department was a short, heavy journey in the back of a cruiser that reeked of stale sweat and the cheap chemical sting of lemon disinfectant. Jasper Miller sat with his hands bound tightly behind him, his posture impossibly straight and composed. He leaned against the unforgiving plastic seat as the town became a passing blur of green and brick. But he wasn't watching the scenery. He was counting the seconds, mentally mapping their route and cataloging every single turn as the cruiser finally pulled into the station's rear lot. It was a squat brick fortress that looked more suited for war than public service. Jasper was then roughly yanked from the car by Officer Vance. The day's heat was at its zenith, baking the asphalt. But as they forced him through the heavy steel rear doors, the air instantly turned to a chilling artificial cold. The station thrummed with the low hum of bureaucracy, distant ringing phones, and the clatter of keyboards. But as they marched him deeper into the building's heart, those familiar sounds dissolved, replaced by the heavy, echoing cadence of boots on concrete. They bypassed the booking desk, completely a breach of protocol that did not escape Jasper's razor-sharp notice, taking him straight down a narrow cinder-block hallway. It was painted a soul-crushing institutional beige, leading to an interrogation room at the corridor's dead end. The room was nothing more than a windowless box, a space engineered to strip a man of his bearings and his will. It held only a scarred metal table bolted to the floor, 3 chairs, and a 2-way mirror dominating one wall, a dark, soulless eye that promised no privacy. Vance shoved Jasper into a chair, cruelly wrenching his arms to loop the cuffs through a metal ring, welded to the table, effectively tethering him. "Don't get comfortable." Vance snarled, his voice a harsh echo in the claustrophobic space before he turned and left. The heavy steel door slammed shut with a finality that would have broken a lesser man. Jasper was alone. The silence was absolute, broken only by the maddening, rhythmic buzz of a failing fluorescent light overhead. But when he focused his hearing, pushing it through the very walls, he could hear it faint, muffled, yet unmistakable. The sound of a dog barking. Ranger. They hadn't taken him to the pound. Not yet. They had locked him in the K9 kennels out back. The bark was deep, relentless, and urgent. It was not a cry of fear, it was a beacon. Ranger was calling out his location, a signal to Jasper that he was still in this fight. Jasper closed his eyes, shutting out the sterile room, and let his mind retreat to a memory from 10 years ago. He was in a muddy trench in a country whose name no longer mattered, shivering in the rain. Beside him was Master Chief Sterling, a man who looked carved from granite, with a mustache like steel wool, and eyes that had witnessed far too much of the world's darkness. Sterling had been cleaning his rifle with deliberate, methodical strokes as mortars walked closer. "You know the difference between a victim and a warrior, Miller?" Sterling had asked, his voice an island of calm in the storm of chaos. "A victim panics, a victim thrashes, a warrior waits. He becomes the coiled spring. The tighter they squeeze, the more potential energy you build. You let them compress you until the very moment they think they've won, and then in the instant they blink, you release." Jasper opened his eyes. The memory settled over him like a suit of armor. He was the coil. He sat perfectly still, his breath slow and measured, listening to Ranger's distant call to arms and waiting for the door to open. He wouldn't have to wait long. The lock groaned with a heavy click, and the door swung inward. Officer Hank Ryler stepped through, followed closely by Officer Sneed, who planted himself in the doorway, blocking any chance of escape. Ryler looked even worse for wear than he had at the diner. His wrist was tightly wrapped in an ace bandage, his face a thunderous mask of a bruised ego and simmering violence. He didn't sit. He paced the tiny room like a caged animal. He circled Jasper like a predator that had scented blood in the water. "You think you're some kind of tough guy, huh?" Ryler sneered, his voice dripping with acid. "You think a few karate moves let you waltz into my town and make me look like a fool in front of my guys?" Ryler stopped his pacing, leaning over the table. His face was just inches from Jasper's. "We ran your prints. Nothing. You're a ghost. And that's good for me. Ghosts have a way of vanishing," he threatened, "and nobody ever misses them." Jasper remained utterly still, his gaze fixed on the wall just past Ryler's ear. This unnerving calm only stoked Ryler's rage. He stood up straight, his eyes finding the small security camera in the corner, its tiny red light blinking patiently. With a slow, arrogant motion, Ryler reached up and covered the lens with his cap, then strode to the wall and deliberately flipped a breaker. The camera's red eye went dark. The room was now a blind spot. "There," Ryler said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Now we're off the record." Unhooking the heavy telescoping baton from his belt, he flicked his wrist, and the steel weapon shot out with a sharp *shink*. "It's just us now, no witnesses, no cameras, just a little lesson in respect." He tapped the baton against his own palm, the rhythm a steady, threatening beat like a pounding heart. "I'm going to break that hand you laid on me," Ryler promised in a low whisper. "And then we're going outside to see just how tough that mud of yours really is." The threat of a captive bolt gun hung in the air as Ryler raised the baton high, his muscles bunching for a brutal strike meant to shatter bone. The violence felt certain, a guillotine poised to drop. "Before you swing that," Jasper said, his voice cutting through the tension. His voice wasn't loud, but it stopped Ryler's arm in midair. It was the calm tone of a man discussing the weather completely at odds with the moment. Jasper finally locked eyes with Ryler, his gaze intense and piercing. "You should know, that tactical harness on my dog, it isn't just for carrying water." Ryler hesitated, the baton still raised a flicker of pure confusion in his eyes. "What in the hell are you babbling about?" Ryler spat. Jasper continued, his words precise and devastating. "That harness is equipped with a military-grade encrypted body camera and a cellular uplink. It has been recording since I left the campground. It recorded you taking the bribe from the mechanic. It recorded you stealing that cash from the tourist. And right now," Jasper leaned forward slightly, testing the limits of his handcuffs. "Boy. It is live-streaming audio and video directly to a secure cloud server monitored by the federal military, police, and the NCIS Cyber Division." The silence that followed was heavier than any physical blow. Ryler's face went from flushed red to a sickly, pasty white in the span of a heartbeat. The baton wavered in his hand. You're lying, he stammered, but his voice lacked all conviction. He was suddenly remembering the blinking light on the harness, the strange device he had completely ignored. I'm a senior chief petty officer with the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Jasper said, lying smoothly about being retired to confuse him. The rank hung in the air like a hammer. If I don't enter a code into my phone in the next 10 minutes to confirm my safety. A distress signal goes out with my GPS coordinates. Federal agents are already watching the feed. They heard you threaten to end my life. They saw you turn off the camera. They're listening to us right now. Jasper nodded at the baton still held in Ryler's trembling hand. So, Officer Ryler, go ahead, strike me. Add assault on a federal asset. 1 to the list of felonies you've committed today. I'm certain the judge will be very interested in the footage. Ryler lowered his arm slowly. The baton slipped from his sweaty grip, clattering to the floor. The bully had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had just flashed a federal badge back. For Ryler, the 10 minutes Jasper spoke of felt less like a span of time, and more like the slow, agonizing descent of a guillotine's blade. Ryler was paralyzed in the center of the interrogation room, his chest hitching with short, panicked gasps, the baton on the floor like a forgotten child's toy. Sneed, the weaselly officer, had wedged himself into the far corner, his wide eyes darting frantically between Jasper and the only exit. The dawning horror that they had provoked something that would consume them was settling in, yet Jasper stayed seated, his hands resting calmly on the table. But the balance of power in the room had been completely upended. He was no longer the captive, but the judge awaiting the arrival of his court. Precisely 20 minutes after Jasper was hauled into the station, the entire building's atmosphere fractured. It began not with a knock, but with the rumble of heavy engines outside, a sound much deeper, more menacing than the local cruisers cutting right through the thin walls. A wave of commotion crashed over the front desk, shouts, the heavy tread of boots, and crisp, authoritative commands that demanded instant obedience. The interrogation room door wasn't opened. It was flung wide, crashing against the rubber stop with violent force. Leading the charge was Captain Marcus Harris of the Georgia State Patrol, a man who seemed carved from solid granite and wore a uniform so impeccably starched it looked like it could draw blood. He was tall, formidable, his campaign hat pulled low over eyes that swept the room with surgical precision. On his flanks were 4 military police officers, their MP armbands stark, their hands resting with a casual readiness on their sidearms. Yet the figure who instantly seized all attention walked between them. She was a woman of about 60, clad in a sharp charcoal gray power suit, a string of real pearls gracing her neck. Her steel-gray hair was cut in a severe, yet elegant bob, and she possessed eyes that held the chilling intelligence of an apex predator. This was Federal Judge Eleanor Sterling, a name spoken in fearful whispers in courtrooms across the Southeast, and a long-time cherished friend of Jasper's family, one who had watched him grow from a boy into a warrior. "Unlock him," Captain Harris commanded, his voice echoing off the cinder-block walls. His gaze wasn't on Ryler, but on the steel cuffs biting into Jasper's wrists. Ryler, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, fumbled for his keys, dropping them twice before his clumsy fingers finally worked the locks. Jasper rose, rubbing his wrists, and gave a respectful nod to the captain and the judge. "Took you long enough?" Jasper deadpanned, a slight smile touching his lips as Eleanor Sterling stepped forward. Completely ignoring the petrified local officers, she placed a gentle hand on Jasper's arm. "The traffic was just awful, Jasper," she said, her voice refined and smooth, but underscored with absolute steel. "And I needed to ensure the U.S. attorney was fully briefed before I came down to handle this situation." She turned slowly, her warm expression toward Jasper, transforming into one of icy contempt for Ryler. "Officer Ryler, I presume," she began. "I am Judge Sterling, and you are in a depth of trouble your father's money could never touch." Ryler attempted to bluster, searching for any remnant of his shattered arrogance. "Now wait a minute, Judge," he stammered, sweat beading on his nose. "This man is a drifter. He attacked an officer. We have rights." Jasper cut him off, stepping forward with purpose. "Actually," Jasper said, his voice carrying clearly to the stunned officers who had gathered in the hallway to witness the fallout. "I wasn't entirely truthful before. I'm not a senior chief." He reached into a back pocket they had neglected to search, their arrogance blinding them to proper procedure, and withdrew a military ID, flipping it open with a snap. "I am Lieutenant Commander Jasper Miller, United States Navy SEALs on active reserve. And you just laid hands on a commissioned officer? Well, in the middle of a federal investigation." The blood drained from Ryler's face, leaving behind the pale, slack mask of a dead man. "Captain Harris, if you would," Judge Sterling commanded. Captain Harris set a rugged, military-grade laptop on the steel table, turning it so everyone could see. Even the officers crowded in the hallway could see the screen. "We pulled this from the cloud server 5 minutes ago," Harris announced as he pressed play. The video was crystal clear, showing the diner from Ranger's own perspective, the audio picking up the sharp sizzle of coffee on the floor. The footage showed Ranger's pained flinch, followed by Ryler's cruel, mocking voice. "Oops, my bad. I didn't see the mutt there." Then the scene cut to the parking lot. The image of Ryler taking cash from a terrified tourist was undeniable, followed by the damning exchange with Lenny. The mechanic. The envelope of cash, changing hands, the low talk of stolen parts. It was all there, every last felony. Every abuse of power was broadcast in high definition. A murmur rippled through the hallway among the other officers of Oak Haven, the men and women silenced by Ryler's bullying for years. They looked at each other. The fear was finally breaking, and disgust was taking its place. "That is enough," Captain Harris said, closing the laptop with a decisive snap. He turned his gaze on Ryler, Sneed, and Vance. "Hank Ryler, Deputy Sneed, Deputy Vance. You are under arrest for extortion, accepting bribes, animal cruelty, assault on a federal officer, and deprivation of rights under color of law." The MPs moved in. It was not a gentle arrest. They spun Ryler around, slamming him against the wall in the exact spot he had tried to intimidate Jasper. Ryler yelped as the handcuffs, real steel, not plastic ties, bit deep into his wrists. Captain Harris reached out and ripped the badge clean off Ryler's chest, tearing the fabric of his shirt. He did the exact same to Sneed and Vance, and the sound of the Velcro tearing was the sound of their authority evaporating. Just then, the phone on the interrogation room wall shrieked a harsh, jarring ring. The light on the console blinked red, a direct line to the mayor's office. The room fell silent. Everyone knew who was calling. Big Jim Ryler had heard the sirens. Judge Sterling walked to the phone, picking up the receiver with a steady, delicate hand. "Ryler here." "What the hell's going on over there?" A booming voice demanded through the line, loud enough for Jasper to hear. "I want that drifter gone, Hank. Do you hear me?" Judge Sterling waited a deliberate beat, letting the charged silence stretch. "Mr. Mayor," she said, her voice cool and dangerously calm. "This is Federal Judge Eleanor Sterling. Your son is in the custody of the military police. I suggest you save your breath for your lawyer, because the FBI is currently executing a search warrant on your office as we speak." She did not wait for his response. She hung up the phone with a decisive click that signaled the end of an era for Oak Haven. Jasper looked at her and gave a slight nod. "Thanks, Auntie Ella," he whispered. "Any time, kid," she replied with a wink. "Now let's go get your dog." The storm that had threatened Oak Haven for days had finally broken overnight, washing away the suffocating humidity, leaving behind a morning that was crisp, clean, and impossibly blue. Puddles on the asphalt reflected the white, puffy clouds drifting across the sky, and the oppressive heat that had weighed on the town. Like a physical burden was gone, replaced by a gentle breeze that smelled of wet earth and blooming magnolia. Jasper Miller stood outside the Oak Haven police station one last time, not as a prisoner, but as a free man. His truck returned to him, with profound apologies from the new acting chief, now idled softly at the curb, its engine purring with a steady, reliable rhythm. Ranger rode shotgun, his head thrust from the half-open window, eagerly drinking in the scent of freedom on the fresh air. Jasper could have just kept driving, vanishing down that endless ribbon of highway that was the closest thing he'd ever known to a home. But there was one last thing to do. He shifted the truck into gear and turned the wheel, heading not toward the freedom of the interstate, but back toward the heart of town. When he pulled into the Oakhaven Diner's lot, the difference in the air was palpable. The squad car that once loomed menacingly by the entrance, hogging the best spots, was gone. In its place were family sedans and rusted pickups. They were parked haphazardly, but happily. The dread that had shrouded the building like a burial cloth had finally lifted with the morning mist. Jasper stepped from the truck, and Ranger leaped down beside him, his tail wagging with a loose, happy rhythm unseen in days. As Jasper pushed the door open, the brass bell jingled, but this time its chime didn't trigger a wave of fearful silence. Instead, it was met by a warm roar of conversation, the clatter of silverware, and genuine unforced laughter. The diner was packed. It was vibrant, alive. Heads turned as he entered, but there was no suspicion in the eyes that met his. There was only recognition, awe, and a profound collective gratitude. Jasper moved toward the counter, planning only to grab a coffee to go, but he didn't make it that far. "There he is, the man of the hour," a voice rang out. It was Mabel. She bustled from behind the counter, moving with an energy that defied her 70 years, her apron spotless, her silver hair pinned in a neat bun. The lines of worry etched into her face just yesterday seemed to have been smoothed away by relief. She didn't ask for his order. She simply walked right up to the large, formidable Navy SEAL and wrapped her arms around his waist in a fierce, grandmotherly hug. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving us our town back." Jasper, usually so stiff and reserved with strangers, hesitated only for a second before gently patting her back. "Just doing what needed to be done, Mabel," he replied softly. She led him not to a stool at the counter, but to the large round table by the window, the captain's table Ryler had claimed as his throne. Today it was held by Arthur and a few other veterans, but they immediately shifted to make room. "Sit," Arthur commanded, his eyes twinkling with new life. The old man looked 10 years younger. His shoulders were unslumped, and his hands, though still trembling slightly, held his coffee cup with a new firmness. "We took a vote," Arthur rasped, grinning. "This is the people's table now, and you are the guest of honor." Jasper sat, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee Mabel placed before him. This was not a formal ceremony. It was something far better. It was the sound of a community finally exhaling. Plates began to arrive, not just for Jasper, but for Ranger. The cook, a shy man with a grease-stained apron, and who usually stayed hidden in the kitchen, came out himself carrying a heavy ceramic platter. On it sat 3 premium, thick-cut Cumberland sausages cooked to perfection, beside a generous helping of scrambled eggs. He placed it reverently on the floor for Ranger. "On the house," the cook mumbled, wiping his hands on his apron. "Real meat, none of that scrap stuff." Ranger needed no second invitation. He looked to Jasper for permission, and at his master's simple nod. He began to devour the meal with polite but enthusiastic focus. For Jasper, Mabel brought a slice of apple pie, still steaming, topped with a scoop of vanilla ice cream. It was already starting to melt into sweet rivulets. "Breakfast dessert," she declared. "It's a tradition starting today." For an hour they sat trading tales, not of war, but of life itself. Arthur spoke warmly of his grandchildren in Atlanta. Mabel spoke of her cherished garden, while other patrons came by one after another to shake Jasper's hand or give a simple, grateful nod. It was a moment of pure Americana, a living picture of resilience and community spirit that had endured beneath the shadow of a tyrant, and now it blossomed in the light. Jasper mostly listened, absorbing a peace he knew was only temporary for him. He was a man of the road, a force that had to keep moving, yet he knew this single moment would be etched in his memory forever. It was the very reason he fought not for nations or ideologies, but for havens just like this one, where good people simply wanted to enjoy their breakfast in peace. Finally, the road beckoned. Jasper rose, laying a $50 bill on the table. Mabel snatched it up in an instant, trying to press it back into his pocket. "Your money's no good here." "Not today, not ever, Jasper Miller," she playfully scolded. Jasper simply smiled. He caught her hand, gently folding her fingers over the bill. "Put it in the tip jar then, Mabel. For the college fund," he said. He nodded toward the young busboy clearing tables. Her eyes welled with tears as she looked at him and nodded back. "You take care of yourself. You hear me?" she added. "And you take care of that magnificent dog." Jasper gave a low whistle for Ranger, who, after licking his plate clean, trotted faithfully to his side. As they moved to the door, a respectful hush fell over the diner once again. But this was not a silence born of fear. It was one of profound reverence. Jasper pushed the door open, stepping out into the brilliant sun. As he headed for his truck, the diner door creaked open behind him. He turned. Arthur had followed him out onto the sidewalk, leaning heavily on his cane. And behind Arthur came Mabel, then the cook, the busboy, and all the other patrons. They poured onto the sidewalk, a silent congregation, after a powerful sermon. As Jasper opened his door, Arthur slowly, deliberately straightened his spine. Ignoring the protest of his aged joints, he let his cane fall, its clatter echoing on the pavement, and raised a trembling hand to his brow in a crisp, perfect, military salute. It was the solemn gesture of one soldier to another, an acknowledgement of a debt that money could never settle. Next to Arthur, a young father in a ball cap placed his hand over his heart. Mabel, with tears in her eyes, slowly did the same. One by one, the entire group, 20, maybe 30 people, followed their lead. Some saluted, others held their hands over their hearts, and some simply stood with heads bowed in reverence. They formed a silent phalanx, honoring the quiet stranger who had walked into their nightmare and delivered them. Jasper paused his hand on the truck door, looking over the crowd, etching each face into his memory. He didn't wave or smile. He simply stood tall, brought his own hand up, and returned Arthur's salute with a sharp, precise motion. He held it for a heartbeat, a silent acknowledgement of them all, of the peace he was leaving in his wake. Then he climbed into his truck. The engine thundered to life. As he pulled onto the main road, Jasper never once glanced in the rearview mirror. He drove past the "Welcome to Oak Haven" sign. There was no need to look back. He knew the town was safe now. The shadow had been lifted. The sun was bright, and the road ahead stretched out open and free. If this story stirred something powerful within you, or reminded you what justice is worth, please take a moment to share it with your friends and family. A single share could carry this message of courage to someone who needs it most right now. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that capture the heart and inspire the soul. Here we are, forging a sanctuary, a community like Oak Haven, built on the bedrock of respect and kindness. Let us join our hearts in prayer. May a guiding hand watch over you and those you hold dear, granting you the clarity to see the truth and the fortitude to endure life's storms. And may you find the courage to be a lone champion for what is right. May he be a shield for the innocent and a voice for the silent ones among us. Just as our faithful Ranger was watched over. If you feel that spirit of justice and divine protection in your soul, type amen in the comments below. Blessings to each and every one of you. Thank you for bearing witness.